Last episode, we met Xenophon. Practical, pragmatic, the man who literally invented the word economics. Today, we meet his classmate, another student of Socrates, but where Xenophon was a soldier and a farmer. This man was a philosopher, with a vision so radical it still shocks readers 2,400 years later. He wanted to abolish private property. He wanted to ban money. He wanted philosophers to rule the world. His name was Plato. Plato was born around 428 BCE in Athens. Aristocratic family, wealthy, connected. He could have lived a comfortable life of politics and parties. Instead, he watched his teacher, Socrates, get sentenced to death by an Athenian jury for asking too many uncomfortable questions. That moment broke something in him. Plato decided that democracy was a disaster, and that the people running cities, in his time and ours, had no idea what they were doing. Around 375 BCE, Plato wrote his masterpiece, The Republic. It is one of the most influential books ever written. It is also one of the most misunderstood. On the surface, it is a dialogue about justice. What is the just life? What is the just society? But buried inside it is a complete economic system, a blueprint for a society Plato thought would actually work. Plato starts with a question every economist eventually asks. Why do humans live in cities at all? Why not just spread out and live alone? His answer is simple, and it is correct. No single person can produce everything they need. We need each other. The farmer needs tools. The blacksmith needs food. The weaver needs both. So humans gather, and they specialize, and they trade. That is the origin of civilization, according to Plato. Mutual need, met through specialization. So far, this sounds like Adam Smith 2,100 years early. And in a sense, it is. Plato describes the division of labor with surgical clarity. He writes that a shoemaker who only makes shoes will make better shoes, faster, than a man who tries to do everything. Specialization, he argues, is not a luxury. It is the engine that makes a city possible at all. But here is where Plato veers into territory no modern economist would follow. He decides that this principle, one person, one job, applies to everything, including ruling the city. If a shoemaker should only make shoes, then a ruler should only rule. And ruling, Plato believes, is the hardest specialization of all. So who should rule? Not soldiers, not merchants, not the wealthy. Philosophers. People train their entire lives to know what is true and what is good. Plato divides his ideal city into three classes. At the bottom, the producers, farmers, craftsmen, merchants. They do the work. They earn money. They own property. In the middle, the auxiliaries, soldiers and guardians who protect the city. At the top, the philosopher-rulers, the wisest, the most disciplined, the class that decides everything. Plato calls this hierarchy natural. Today, we would call it an aristocracy of expertise. Now here is where it gets strange. The philosopher-rulers, Plato says, must own nothing. No private property, no gold, no silver, no families of their own. They live communally, in barracks. They eat at common tables. They share everything. Why? Because Plato believed that the moment a ruler owned property, he would start ruling for himself instead of for the city. Wealth corrupts judgment. Self-interest corrupts justice. The only solution was to remove the temptation entirely. This is the first detailed argument for what we would now call a property-less elite. Plato is not saying everyone should be poor. He is saying the people who make the decisions must be insulated from money. He goes further. He argues that even the children of the rulers should be raised collectively, not by their biological parents, so that no parent can favor their own child over the city. To Plato, family wealth was a corruption mechanism. He wanted it gone, at least at the top. What about the producers, the farmers and craftsmen at the bottom? They keep their property, they keep their money, They run businesses. They engage in trade. Plato is no communist in the modern sense. He believes ordinary economic life should continue. But he wants strict limits. No citizen, he writes, should be more than 4 times richer than the poorest citizen. Beyond that ratio, society becomes unstable. Inequality breeds resentment. Resentment breeds revolution. So the state must cap wealth. Plato also has views on money itself. In his later book, The Laws, he writes that gold and silver coinage should be banned for ordinary citizens. Domestic currency should be a token money, useful only inside the city, worthless outside it. International trade in precious metals should be the monopoly of the state. Why? Because Plato saw money as a solvent. It dissolved tradition, dissolved community, dissolved the bonds that held a city together. He wanted those bonds preserved at all costs. Notice what Plato is doing here. He is treating economics as a moral problem. Markets, in his view, are not neutral. They have effects on character. A society obsessed with wealth produces greedy, anxious, divided citizens. A society that limits wealth produces virtuous ones. This is one of the oldest arguments in economics, and it never goes away. Every time someone says capitalism is bad for the soul, they are echoing Plato. Plato did not just theorize. He tried to put his ideas into practice. 3 times, he traveled to Sicily to advise the rulers of Syracuse. 3 times, it ended badly. The first trip, he was reportedly sold into slavery. He was ransomed by friends. The second and third trips, he tried to mentor a young prince named Dionysius II into becoming a philosopher king. Dionysius turned out to be a tyrant. Plato escaped with his life. The lesson, repeated through history, is that philosopher kings are very rare, and what shows up instead is usually just a king. So was Plato right? Most economists would say absolutely not. The 20th century gave us several real-world experiments in property abolition and centralized rule by an elite. The Soviet Union, Maoist China, the Khmer Rouge. The results were not philosopher kings. The results were famine, terror, and economic collapse. Markets, for all their flaws, do something Plato underestimated. They coordinate the actions of millions of strangers without any single mind having to plan it. But Plato is not a footnote. His questions still bite. Should the people who make policy be allowed to own the assets they regulate? Should there be a maximum wage as well as a minimum? Does extreme inequality destabilize democracy? Does consumerism corrode community? Every progressive movement of the last 2 centuries has, in some form, asked Plato's questions. He was wrong about the answers. He was right about the questions. Next episode, we meet the man who tutored Plato's most famous student, the man who would systematically dismantle Plato's economics and put something better in its place. The man who first separated economics from politics, who first defined value, who first argued that some forms of money-making were natural and others were not. He was Plato's student, but he became his greatest critic. Next time, Aristotle,